Right. Welcome, everybody, to the Middle and Upper James Riparian Consortium Virtual Buffer Summit. This is our third Buffer Summit since the consortium started in 2018. We're delighted that all of you are here today and really appreciate the time that you are making to join. So we had just a presenter tech check with a couple folks earlier, and we have a really stellar lineup of folks today joining us. So we're really excited. So thanks in advance to all the presenters for being here. Thanks to those of you who this might be your first Buffer Consortium event, or this might be your third Buffer Summit. We're really glad that you're here. So there are a couple things in the chat roll. We're going to ask folks to share your name and affiliation in the chat roll, and community member is a welcome affiliation. So feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat roll. And we're going to be doing breakout groups in just a little bit where folks can actually introduce yourself to each other. So it's great to see also who is in the room. So maybe Amber, we'll go ahead and do this as folks are joining now before we screen share. I want to invite folks to, we do have this set up as a Zoom meeting so you can see each other. And we know many of you have many things happening, but I want to invite you to just turn your view to gallery for a moment. You can turn it, as you likely know, in the upper right-hand corner of Zoom between speaker and between gallery. And if you're in a place where you're able to turn your video on for a moment, I invite you to go ahead and turn your video on. If you're not able to turn your video on, that's totally cool. But take a moment and see who is at the Buffer Summit today. So again, we're inviting folks to share your name and affiliation in the chat roll. Community member is a welcome affiliation. And just take a minute to scroll through. You know, many of us haven't seen each other in person in a while, and you can just scroll through and get a sense of who's on here, maybe make a new connection for someone. And it's really great to see many folks today joining. So with that being said, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for presenters for joining. Amber, you want to go ahead and start sharing the slides for a moment? My name is Christine Govey with Dialogue and Design Associates. We are a facilitation and design firm based in Central Virginia, and we love working with the Riparian Consortium. So, welcome to the Buffer Summit. We are, again, this is our third summit, and we're really glad that all of you are here today. We invite you to take care of your own needs today. If you have family, food, kids in the background, that's completely welcome. We do invite you, go ahead and go to the next slide, Amber, please, to mute yourself. If you're in a place with background noise, feel free to go ahead and mute yourself. For those of you who might not be familiar, in the bottom of Zoom, there are a couple different icons you can use. The microphone icon is where you can mute and unmute yourself. You can stop and start your video. You can also rename yourself by hovering over your image, and you'll see 3 dots. You can hit rename, or you can do that under participants as well. So we invite you to type in your full name when you're joining. And again, for folks who have just joined, please share your name and affiliation in the chat roll. If you are, if your connection's spotty, you can turn off your video to free up bandwidth, but we will be again going into breakout rooms in just a little bit. And so that's a chance where you'll get to actually meet each other a little bit more and hear what folks are up to, and we'll share more directions about that soon. Again, please stay muted if you're not speaking, and we are recording the session to share. We invite you to use the chat roll. Feel free to share an upcoming webinar, training, or event that is taking place in the chat roll so other folks know about it. We're going to be using the chat roll for questions, and our presenters are going to be asking you some questions too. You are welcome to use the raise hand function, which can be found under the reactions button, but we'll also be welcoming questions in the chat roll. We have a few different ways that we're going to be engaging today. Again, we'll have some small group breakouts. We'll be using the chat roll. If you're joining by phone only, we do have some facilitators who can go into a breakout room for you to gather your feedback if you're not able to view the screen. So no problem if you're joining by phone only. We'll be able to get your feedback at a couple points today as we use a couple different digital tools moving forward. And we encourage you to connect with others. We actually are not sharing contact info here, but we are going to be sharing your name and affiliation at the end of the Buffer Summit summary. So we will have a summary with presentations, links to presentations, as well as videos of the presentation that we'll share out after the summit. So thanks again for our presenters for joining. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So here is our agenda for the day. We have, Emily has put in the chat roll, and maybe Emily, if you'll go ahead and pop in again, a link to the program. The program has the flyer on page 1 and a program with the details of each session and bios in that PDF. So you're welcome to click on that PDF and learn more about the awesome folks we have lined up for the Buffer Summit today, as well as some Zoom Pro tips at the end. So if you're not quite sure, if you're having some technical difficulties, you can either text Emily, which Emily's number is in the chat roll, or you're welcome to find some details there. So here we are. In just a moment, Amber Ellis of the James River Association is going to be sharing more about the goals of the consortium. We'll hear an update from James Martin from DEQ about the state of the James River buffers. Then we'll go into breakout groups. We'll have a stretch break after that. We have some really stellar panels for the love of plants, growing community support for native riparian species. And we'll hear a little bit more from you, each of you, about your ideas for riparian plant guides for the middle and upper James. We'll have a break for lunch. 30 minutes. The Zoom room will stay open if you want to hang out, but you're also welcome to just do your own thing as well. We'll come back with a session on making buffers count, dispelling the myths and sharing tips for reporting projects. Then we have Dr. Kristen Dabala of California is joining for a keynote on buffers with benefits, carbon, biodiversity, and partnerships. Some really exciting research. And then our third panel around resilient collaboration, building authentic partnerships and leaning into your gifts. Really excited about that one. And we'll wrap up with some closing reflections and an evaluation. So we'll roll things up completely by 2:30 today. We invite you to just treat this as a kind of a vacation day for yourself. Feel free to put your email away, put your phones away, and just bring your full attention as you're able to the Buffer Summit. If you need to leave and come back, that's no problem at all. But again, we do invite you to join, and we will be, let's see, Emily, let's go ahead. If you will put links to the 2 things we want to ask folks to share today would be really helpful. Take a look at. We have 2 different evaluations. The first one is going to be an evaluation of the Buffer Summit itself. So we really actively use your feedback for planning future Buffer Summits. So this is a link to a Google survey for the Buffer Summit itself. And the second is a very brief survey for the consortium as a whole. We're doing an evaluation for the consortium as a whole. We'd really love your feedback. There's a chance to win a $50 REI gift card. So we encourage you to fill it out. Really helpful feedback for us as we're getting ready to go into the next round. With that being said, one more call to share your name and affiliation in the chat roll. Welcome community member as an affiliation. And with that being said, welcome again to the Buffer Summit. And Amber, I'm going to turn it over to you to go ahead and introduce the consortium as a whole. So thanks everyone again for joining. You're on mute, Amber.
Slow start to the day. All right, good morning, everybody. I will share about the consortium in a minute, but I wanted to start just to be able to see all your faces and start the day with some gratitude and note some things I'm super grateful for today. One, technology. I wish we were in person, but I'm grateful that we have this ability to set up and it kind of is able to bring people from all over Virginia and even some folks from outside of the state. So thankful for that. Shout out to Dialogue and Design team who have been rocking it out with all the logistics and planning for this day. So thank you so much. Who else do I want to give shout outs to? I feel like I'm on a radio show. Steering committee who have really helped guide this ship so far and have helped come up with the agenda for today and what topics we think would be really valuable. And then how much the partnerships have really grown over the past couple months. I've been looking back over the past 3 years, and it's awesome to see how existing partnerships have deepened, and then all of the new faces that are here each time that we meet. I can honestly say that I love tackling big stuff. I like doing that, and I couldn't be more happy to do it alongside such an awesome group of people that are as crazy and passionate, I think, as I am about restoring our land and water, and want to have fun in the process of doing so. And then last but not least, this is a personal thing, but the cherry on top is all of these efforts are helping restore the James River, which has been a river I've called home since, well, my entire life. So super grateful for that. So if you're feeling any gratitude for someone or something, feel free to put it in the chat and share that with us so that we can live through that with you. All right. And I'm going to share my screen. think I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, here we go. All right. All righty. So some of this will be repeats for some of you, and some will be brand new information. The consortium, our vision, growing partnerships to create healthy streamside ecosystems for clean water in the James River today and tomorrow. And this is still in work in progress. Greenfin, if you're on the line, I know we haven't totally finished it yet, but I just love this graphic so much. We've been working on it with as part of the consortium to celebrate why riparian forest buffers are so awesome. So for newbies in the group, this helps set the stage. This is the real focus of the consortium, are these amazing areas along our waterways that are vegetated. And you can see some of the benefits. They shade and cool our streams. They provide space for humans to view nature and relax along its banks. They help stabilize our banks. They provide wildlife habitat. They create green jobs. They sequester carbon. They support recreation and local economies because clean water is needed for that. And then even under the water, they're providing great benefits for our trout and other critters that live in there, and all of those bacteria and fungi in the streams that help cleanse the water. They need those forest buffers too to be with all of their leaves that are falling in our waterways. So great graphic, and we're super excited to have it, and hope it helps you see the benefit of riparian forest buffers. So that's our main focus. And then this is the geography that the consortium is mostly focused in, which is the middle and upper James watersheds. But I should note that our work doesn't just impact or benefit those counties or those areas. A lot of our work has been like the buffer trainings we've been holding are actually open to pretty much anyone. So we've seen benefits to other folks across the Bay watershed. And our awareness building and those graphics and things like that are helping across the state as well. So our mission, we're a network of private, nonprofit, public partners. We share expertise and resources to increase implementation, as well as awareness of riparian buffers and their value to landowners. Again, with a priority focus on riparian forest buffers and across that upper and middle James watershed area. We have 4 main values that help guide our decision-making and our work. We believe in collaboration. We can go further together. It might take longer, but we can get further as a team. Stewardship, not just putting in new projects or not just bringing in new partners, but really stewarding those areas and making sure that we are doing it in a way for long-term sustainability. Holistic, realizing that sometimes a forest buffer isn't the only thing that's needed. Sometimes we need to include other elements into a project. And then the last one, initiative, we're proactive. You know, it's easy to talk about all the challenges and all the things that need to be done, but something I'm most proud of with this group is we're like, okay, that's the challenge. What are we going to do? How can we, as a team, solve it? And I think we've done a lot of that over the past few years. This just highlights some of our partners and kind of the roles that we play. So myself and Dialogue and Design Associates serve as the planning team. And then those logos that you see there serve on the steering committee, and we meet every month. And then the bottom is just listing a few of the other entities that participate. So it might be some of you here today. And that's a list of over 300 folks that participate either in a summit or meetings, action team initiatives, and things like that. How we started, just to see where we've been and what we've been up to. So as Christine mentioned, we sort of kicked off in 2018, but officially in 2019. And the first year or so, we were just trying to figure out what was our priorities, how can we, all of us are working on our own little pieces of the pie, and how can we bring that together to have a bigger collective impact. So We figured ourselves out, developed some teams to do work through, and have been testing those out on different projects and in different areas. And now we're sort of in that evaluation phase. What worked? What didn't work? What maybe should we adjust a bit as we move into these next 3 years? And we've been grateful that the effort has been funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, as well as the Virginia Environmental Endowment, who has funded a lot of the implementation that's been happening. And so both of those were the past 3 years, and then we have secured funding through the end of 2024. So just some quick, I'm not going to cover everything these teams have been doing because they've been doing a lot, but just some quick little snippets of highlights. The planning team, again, our goal is to increase collaboration and strengthen partnerships. So that looks like an event like today, bringing people together. And since the launch, we've engaged almost 700 partners through various events, field tours, summits, things like that. The Knowledge Network team is kind of co-led by the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals, and the Stroudwater Research Center. And that's all about building knowledge and capacity, making sure that we have the workforce we need to get these buffers in the ground, and that those folks are learning the most up-to-date information to make sure we're all doing this in the best way that we can. And a big initiative of that group has been the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Buffer Certificate Program. And we've done 1 round and we've certified 18 folks, and we're in the middle of the 2nd round now, this fall. The targeting and outreach team is a mix of JRA, Center for Watershed Protection, and Greenfin Studio that help lead the group. And it's all about building awareness and making sure that our partners have the tools and resources they need to do solid and up-to-date outreach to landowners and to the public. And thus far, we have CWP did analysis of 3 different counties in the Middle and Upper James watersheds to kind of help guide that outreach. And then the last team is the implementation team. And that's co-led by myself and Sammy with Trout Unlimited. And that's all about coordinating implementation, knowing that we're all doing this stuff out on the landscape, and we need to make sure we're in the know on who's doing what, and finding those gaps where we can really help push things forward. And one of those larger gap filling efforts has been the James River Buffer Program. And since its launch in 2019, between Department of Forestry and James River Association and Chesapeake Bay Foundation, we've installed 345 acres of forest buffer thus far. 2 other things we've accomplished over the past few years are the development of 2 tools. One is the coordination tool. I'll dive into that a little bit later. I'm just giving them a shout out, basically to see how we're doing towards buffer progress, who's working where, what are all the priority areas, so that you can layer them up and see them all in one place. And then the second one was a Streamside program report tool. Lots of feedback from partners that they weren't sure what programs were available to landowners and how to know if it was the right fit. So that tool is actually right now, we're looking at getting feedback from everyone to see how we can improve it to make it more useful. So there is a survey that I think they'll drop in the chat. Please take time to do that in the next few days, in the next week or so. And then these last few slides focus on the next 3 years. So we've done a ton the past 3 years. What are we doing moving forward? One is just strengthening, expanding what worked. And I should add to that, and being okay with setting aside some things that maybe didn't work so great. Trying to build a resilient collaborative model. What does it look like to sustain this effort long term? Another one is growing regional riparian workforce capacity, everything from understanding what our nurseries need to grow enough trees to meet these goals, to what feet on the ground to do the designs and working with landowners. And then the 4th one is piloting a James River stewardship program. Again, another thing that we keep hearing from folks is maintenance, maintenance, maintenance. And so we want to, as a consortium, fill that gap and support projects that are already in the ground that just need a little bit of TLC to be successful. And then the last one is increasing local competency in stream bank stabilization. There's just, people not being totally clear on what to tell a landowner. They go out there and maybe there's a failing bank. What is the answer? What's the best approach to those issues? And then last but not least, we just did a whole urban buffer, a few roundtables, and received feedback to understand what the challenges are in an urban environment or developed environment. And there's kind of 3 pockets of information that we're going to be diving a bit more into. And that's buffers along our rails, trails, and parks, how policy and local ordinances can really help restore and protect our buffers. And then the third are kind of those non-traditional buffers that haven't had a lot of emphasis in the past. So homeowner association areas, golf courses, and small private parcels. So we'll be working on that. And I think that's my end of that. I tried to get through it quickly. If you want to see more information around those things, feel free to reach out to me, or you can visit www.jamesriverconsortium.org to dive into the details. I'm going to stop my share.
That's awesome. Thanks, Amber. Great overview. So many tools and so many good things taking place. We have a couple minutes for questions. There was one question from Sally in the chat roll earlier about, do we go into West Virginia? And I replied saying we're focused in Virginia, but open to partnerships and new members. Amber, anything else you want to share to that? And if anyone else has questions about the tools, the consortium, ways you can get engaged, feel free to raise your hand or put questions in the chat roll. We welcome it.
Yeah, I know there's like some tiny, I don't remember the mileage, but there's like a teeny little bit of West Virginia in the James River watershed, but I can't, it's like so small. So we don't, it's not in that watershed specifically, but again, like Christine said, this work can benefit people from all different states. So definitely welcome people from West Virginia to join the effort.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Amber. Any other questions from folks? Anybody want to come off mute and ask any questions?
Yeah, or if any of the teams, if I missed anything that you're like, I wish you would have highlighted this, feel free to share that.
All right. So thanks, Amber, again for that overview. Super helpful. For folks who just joined, welcome to the Buffer Summit. We invite you to put your name and affiliation, including welcome to community members, in the chat roll. So feel free to add those. Because we're not gathering in person, we are really actively seeking your feedback in a couple different realms. And Emily is going to be sharing over the course of the day ways to share feedback both on the Buffer Summit and the evaluation for the consortium as a whole. So really, if you could take a couple minutes to give feedback, that would be super helpful. Shireen says in the chat, the Knowledge Network team always welcomes new members. And then, Carl, we'll go to your question in a moment, but we do want to say that the consortium is an open book. If you would like to engage with the steering committee, if you would like to engage on an action team, if you have an idea, we know many of you live and breathe buffers every day. So if there's something that you see that you want to have done, you are welcome to join in a greater capacity with the consortium to do it. So it is very much open to new members, your knowledge, your experience, gaps you see. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. Carl has asked the Department of Conservation and Recreation, agricultural programs included through the soil and water conservation districts. Amber, is that something that you're able to respond to, or want to tag somebody else?
Question. And I would say yes, the Virginia Ag Cost Share Program is administered through the soil and water conservation districts. And if anybody else, or was that the question, Carl? Or was that the name? Yeah.
Carl, did you want to say anything else about the question?
Keith, on that Streamside, maybe it was for the Streamside program report tool. If it was a question around that, we do have those programs listed on there as well.
Keith, is there anything else you wanted to share? I saw you just turn your video on. Are the DCR ag programs included through the soil and water conservation districts? Any other district folks want to share any thoughts on that question? Or Carl, any more details? So we welcome feedback. If folks have additional knowledge to questions that are being shared, feel free to add them. We'll be sure to have that info available to participants, Carl says. Great. So with that being said, I also want to thank our presenters for staying on time today. It's amazing to me how our presenters have shown up for every step of the preparation process. So really give big shout outs to all our presenters across the board so that we keep things rolling today. And I just want to echo what Amber said in terms of thanking our dialogue and design team, the planning team, the steering committee. We have an amazing team and it would not be possible without them. So Emily, Leah, Sierra, thank you so much to each of you for all you're doing. With that being said, we are going to go ahead and move into our first speaker. We're really excited to have James Martin here today, and I'm going to turn it back to you, Amber, to introduce James while I get ready to pull the slides up. So over to you, Amber.
Oh, yep. Sorry, I was answering Carl's question and then looking at Genevieve. Sorry, I'm like a bird today. All right. Yes, so our next speaker we have, which we invite every year, and we're grateful that he agrees to join us every year. We'll be hearing from James Martin with the Department of Environmental Quality, and we're going to hear about the state of the James River and our buffers. So as we all know, riparian buffers are one of the most cost-effective strategies to improve water quality in our streams and our rivers across the James River watershed, the state of Virginia, and the Chesapeake Bay watershed. They're one of many practices called out in our state's watershed implementation plan. We're excited to hear from James to get a glimpse into how we're doing, and also hear if there's any larger state initiatives that may impact our efforts. So I'll toss it over to you, James. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Amber. And, you know, I wanted today to actually start us off with a little poll for the participants. Want to get a little information about your efforts and your history of implementing riparian forest buffers. So let's see, can we go ahead and throw that poll up for the group? When was the first time you planted a forest buffer or were involved in a forest buffer planting project?
Great, James, just a quick question. Since I'm sharing my screen, I'm not able to see, are the polls showing up okay?
The poll popped up on my screen, yes.
Perfect, great.
Yep, and Christine, the results are coming in too, so
Perfect,
I can
thank
move
you.
it up as long as we want.
Thank you.
And can we do both at the same time, Christine?
The poll and the slides?
Yeah.
We should be able to. Can you, well, do you want to share the results now, James, or at the end?
Let's let people go ahead and continue to respond to the poll, and I'll continue walking through my presentation, if that's all right. If the poll is in the middle of your screen, you can slide that off of the presentation so you can see the slides. Okay, let's go on to the first slide, Christine. Thanks. So I wanted to start by just kind of sharing our nitrogen and phosphorus reduction progress. This is focused on the James River in particular. You can see from 2009 through 2020, the years are down on the x-axis of this plot, and nitrogen loads on the left and phosphorus on the right. The light blue at the bottom is loads coming from natural sector areas, so wetlands and forests. The orange is agricultural derived loads. The gray is developed lands. Yellow is septic loads. And the dark blue at the top is wastewater loads. So, as I said, we've definitely made progress through time, but if you look at the nitrogen loads and focus in on that thin yellow bar that represents septic loads, you can see through time that the position of that piece of the bar stays pretty steady. which means everything below it has stayed pretty steady. And in fact, most of the reduction we've seen in loads has come from the dark blue bar, from the wastewater sector. Looking forward to the last bar on the right, our WIP 3, that's our plan for 2025. You can see which bars have to shrink and where most of the remaining effort is going to have to come from. And it's really the large reduction in the orange bar and the agriculture, and the gray bar, which is developed lands. Very similar story for phosphorus, a little bit more progress from the ag and urban sectors on phosphorus. But again, the majority of the reductions happening in the wastewater sector. Let's go on to the next slide. So here's kind of a highlight of where the reductions have come from and where they are needed moving forward. 94%, that's the percent of our reductions from 2009 to 2020 that have happened in wastewater. Agriculture had a little bit of that. You notice there is no bar there for developed or for septic for the nitrogen loads here in the past. That is because, in fact, loads have increased from those sectors from 2009 to 2020. Moving forward, 2021 to 2025, the most of the reductions are planned to come from agriculture, some from developed, some from natural, a little more from wastewater, and some reductions from septic. But just looking at these pies doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. Let's click to the next slide. If we adjust the pies to be representative of the size or the amount of load reduction that we've achieved, it looks like this. So this is good news, actually. Most state basins, most Virginia basins, when we look at this data, the pie on the left, the reductions that have been achieved, is usually much smaller than the pie on the right, meaning we have more to do than we've accomplished through time. In the James, that's not the case. We've achieved over 7 million pounds of nitrogen reductions in the James, and that accounts for almost 300,000 pound increase in loads from development and 48,000 pound increase in loads from septic systems. Moving forward, we have about 3 million pounds of reductions left to go. But a big chunk of that has to come from agriculture. If you look at because we've now made these pies representative of the loads that have been reduced, think how many times you could fit that slice of agriculture pie on the left into the agriculture pie on the right. That'll give you some indication of how much effort multiplier we need to apply in the agricultural sector. And oh, by the way, the pie on the left was achieved over 10 years. The pie on the right has to be achieved over 5. So once you've figured out how many slices of that agriculture pie you can fit in there, multiply it by 2, because you have half the time. So I don't know what you guys come up with, but I get about a 6-fold increase in effort from agricultural reductions, which sounds like a lot until you think about the developed sector, where we had 300,000 pound load increase, and we're looking for a significant load decrease in the next 5 years. So a lot of work left to do. Next slide, please. Land use change is a big part of this load equation that we look at. I mentioned the increase in developed loads. It's because, according to our models and the forecast, we've added 54,000 acres of developed lands in the James watershed, added 10,500 septic systems. Of course, those loads are going to increase. And unfortunately, we've done it largely at the expense of natural lands, forests. Some agriculture has gone to development. Mostly forest has gone to development. And what we've seen is oftentimes, even when agriculture converts to development, we see forest converting to agriculture to maintain that production base. So the net effect is a significant loss in forest lands. But nonetheless, the James River is blessed, right? 76% of the watershed remains in natural uses. It's as high as any other basin in Virginia. Frankly, it's probably as high as any other basin in the Bay watershed. So definitely a blessing there, and one that we want to try and maintain. All of these estimates for land use change are going to be updated based on imagery, as opposed to these forecasts that were largely modeled. The Bay program has compared 2013 and 2017 era imagery sets to actually measure land use change and see this conversion. So we'll be seeing the results of that work coming out just in the next few days and months, with the release of the next version of the Bay model that we call CAST for 2022 and 2023. Next slide, please. So let's talk buffers. This group likes buffers. I like buffers. Buffers are good. And we've had a lot of buffer implementation through time. Here, I tracked it all the way back to the year 2000. So this is 20 years of buffer implementation reporting for Virginia's Chesapeake Bay watershed. So what we've found is typically the James, as you know, is a very large basin. And what we've seen on average is about half of the buffers that we have in our plan to be implemented and that are being implemented through time are in the James. I'm sorry, I didn't have the breakout for just the James River here, but this is Virginia Bay wide. You can see we have a lot of implementation, definitely a surge of implementation here in the 2008, 9, 10 era with, I think maybe that's when CREP was started. And in our models, buffers have a 10-year credit duration, which means in 2020, we can only count the buffers that were installed since 2010, unless they've been inspected. And for those buffers that are inspected, we can continue to count them toward progress. But for those that aren't, you see in the top row there, all of those buffers from 2000 to 2010 that were not inspected or that we don't have inspection data for fall out of our model, and we don't get to count them. That's about 18,000 acres worth of buffers that we lose credit for. Additionally, we have land use data built into the model dating to 2013. So we lose an additional 2,600 acres of simulated credit because it's assumed to be captured in the model's base conditions. All in all, if you look at the data that comes out of CAST and you look at how many BMPs we've reported and simulated in the progress, you'll see a much smaller number than the total cumulative for all of these years. Recent
James,
changes,
one more minute.
Yeah. Okay.
One more minute.
Yep, thanks. Recent changes in the Bay program have extended the buffer credit duration. So to 15 years. So we are going to gain back about 5,000 of those acres that we currently lose because of credit duration, kind of that 2006 to 2010 period. But only temporarily, right? Each year we move into the future, we lose a year in the past, unless those practices are inspected. Next slide, please. So we've made a lot of progress. Most from the wastewater sector. Some progress is lost due to growth, increasing developed loads, and conversion of forests to developed increases that adverse impact of growth. We need a lot more progress, maybe about tenfold in the ag sector across the state. And we need to reverse those increasing trends in developed and septic loads. Efforts to establish and maintain conserved forest cover should be expanded. Headwaters and riparian corridors are the key, and increasing a focus on verification of historically established buffers will help, right? We'll try to keep more of those buffers in line and in the model. Efforts to change development patterns and behaviors are going to be really important to our future success in meeting our water quality goals. Retaining forest buffers when forest and agriculture areas are developed, for example, is a huge benefit. The model may not see it as that, but we know our water quality in the streams does. So that's, I think, my last slide. Christine, one more. One last thing to mention, this is my contact information, but only for the next few days. After November 10th, my email address will be changing to a DCR-based address. I recently accepted the position over at the Soil and Water Conservation Division at DCR. So I'll be making that shift, and we'll be happy to join you in the future from a different agency.
That's awesome. Thank you, James. So we have several questions that have come into the chat roll and also our results of the poll. So James, do you want to tee up your question?
Yeah, so the results of the poll, hopefully everybody's already made the connection to why I asked when the first time you implemented a buffer was. The follow-up question is, when's the last time you visited that site where you implemented your first buffer? If you haven't in the last 10 or 15 years, please do document that visit. If it's continuing to function as intended, document that and work with us to try and get the practice reported so we can continue to get credit for it in our models.
Great, super helpful.
Thank you all.
Great, thank you. So a couple of questions.
And for those that haven't planted one yet, what's holding you up? Why are you in this meeting? Isn't it planting season?
James, no, we want people to be here. Well, they're learning all kinds of things. So Patty Nylander asks in the chat roll, what type of land cover is deemed natural?
Included in natural is forest lands, anything that has tree cover, and anything that is classified as wetlands. That's what we include in our natural sector. Even ag lands that are left in a natural state, kind of fallow in not in production, are counted in agriculture, even though they're not receiving fertilizer and not being used for production. But yeah, so natural is forests and wetlands.
Great, thanks, James. So Matt Kowalski asks, is it correct to say that the reductions come from the natural category come from conversions to other land uses?
So included in the natural load sector is also loads that derive from stream bank erosion, and that stream bank erosion is mitigated by implementation of BMPs on the upland. So we can change our natural loads by changing the stream bank erosion. Also included in natural loads is the reductions that we get by implementing forest harvest BMPs, best management practices, on those areas where we're harvesting timber in our forests.
Great. And James, I love how you just modeled spelling out an acronym for best management practice. So thanks for that. So folks, we have another question in the chat room, but we will go into breakout rooms in just a moment. So spell out acronyms the first time you use them would be great to make sure everyone's on the same page. So thanks for that response, James. Adrian asks, does anyone have an estimate of the manpower or people power costs required to re-inspect these buffers falling out of credit duration? What is being done to address it other than increasing credit duration? Good question.
Yeah, it's even a better question because it's asked to everybody. So, I'd like to hear what people's thoughts are. Amber mentioned maintenance. Kind of part and parcel to that maintenance is documenting that you were there, that you did maintain that buffer, and that it is continuing to exist and function as intended. I can say that the Bay program is looking at the possibilities of using remote sensing as a tool to help us verify buffers. And we can pretty easily identify whether a buffer is in place. What's harder to identify is whether there is concentrated flow paths through that buffer that are rendering it ineffective. So still working to try and resolve that. Happy to hear other thoughts about how we can improve re-inspection efforts.
Yeah, it's such a big number and such a big question. So I want to invite folks to share ideas in the chat roll. Patty has her hand up and Amber is getting ready to say, share something too. So
Yeah.
we'll go ahead, Amber.
Yeah, just to share what we're working on in terms of that, Adrian and James. I mentioned it briefly in the intro, but our next NIFWIF grant actually has funding there to pilot a stewardship program, not to just help JRA's projects, but to help keep these buffers out there in the model. And the past few weeks and upcoming weeks, I've been doing visits to some old CREP sites that partners of the consortium have been sending along and going out with me to visit them and see like, okay, this one's expired or it didn't meet the standards, or this one's about to. These are the issues we're seeing. And the biggest issues that we've heard is invasive species management and survival rate of trees. So our next grant, real quickly, has funding for 3 interns per year, so 6 total interns to help with doing site checks on projects, and it also has funding for invasive management and replants on, I think, 300 acres. So our hope is to assess 600 and perform maintenance on 300, and have already had a lot of great conversations with NRCS and FSA about how this could help the particularly buffers in the CREP program.
What does CREP stand for, Amber?
Oh gosh, what is it? Conservation Resource Enhancement Program? Is that right? Reserve program. That's the part I always mess up. It doesn't make
sense. Yeah, so great. So huge need, huge opportunity. There is a question from Kate, and then Patty, we're going to you. Is there a list for grass and shrubby vegetation available or close substitutes? So that's going to be a topic of discussion today. So Shireen, Virginia, Amber, if you have any thoughts to that, feel free to add it to the chat roll. Patty, over to you.
Yeah, just to keep us on time, back to kind of how much time it takes. I mean, DOF, we've actually had to hire 3 riparian buffer specialists just to assist with the re-enrollment process for CREP, specifically Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. So it does take a lot of time, even before the landowner decides whether or not they want to re-enroll. It takes a lot of field visits to go out there and look at every single contract that is due to expire every year. And we do that, DOF does that in partnership with NRCS and FSA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, Farm Service Agency. We work with them to determine that eligibility. So it's quite a lift.
Absolutely. Such key points, Patty. Thank you for that. And Patty gave a great presentation at last year's Buffer Summit about different stages of riparian buffer growth. So you can find the recording on the jamesriverconsortium.org webpage for the Buffer Summit last year with some really great feedback. With that being said, several of the panel topics today and speakers were born out of a need that we've heard from consortium members. So if you want to see this conversation continue at a future meeting, let us know, because these are really rich discussion points. So yeah, great response, Patty. All right, so I want to ask everyone to join me in thanking James for a great presentation and quick, robust discussion later. So you can find the reactions button for clapping or just do jazz hands, whatever works for you. So thanks, James, for that presentation. Really appreciate it. And Amber has shared her email address in the chat roll too, to join a conversation around piloting a program. So great. So thanks, James, so much for joining. So we're going to move into brief breakout groups. And this is, you know, when we used to attend in-person buffer summits, this is when we would just kind of hang out and hear from each other a little bit. So these are going to be brief, just about 15 minutes. And then we're going to come back with a stretch break. And then For the Love of Plants, growing community support for native riparian species, which we're really excited about that. Amber, do you want to go ahead and share this slide? So these are just kind of a quick get to know folks. You might have known folks for a long time, but in the breakout rooms, they're going to be self-facilitated, just about 15 minutes each. We're going to ask folks to share your name and affiliation, and again, community member as a welcome affiliation, and your favorite restoration project, and what type of field activity or site tour would you like to do with the consortium. So as we're planning ahead for the next 3 years, we'd love to hear what kinds of activities you'd like to see the consortium do. And as we're focusing on restoration, where we would like to hear, you know, what kind of restoration projects really make you excited. Find somebody to take some notes in your small group to bring ideas back to the chat roll. And after 15 minutes, we'll come back to share a couple ideas, quick stretch break, and then we'll move into our next panel For the Love of Plants. And if you're not in a place where you're able to join a chat roll or a breakout group, you know, some folks are, I just got a message from someone that they're in a meeting. It's okay if you don't join, you'll just stay in the main room. So that's completely fine if you're not able to join as well. Any questions from anyone before we go into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes? Okay, so again, your favorite restoration project, what type of field activity or site tour would you like to see the consortium do, and your name and affiliation. Please do unmute yourself and turn your video on if you're in a place to do so, if you're able to join the small groups. And if you have any technology problems, Emily, can you put your cell phone number in the chat roll one more time? You can always text Emily if you have any questions. So with that being said, we will go ahead and open up the breakout groups, and we will come back at about 11:05, something like that. I'll send a message to folks before we go, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes.